Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. As people continue to come in, we do want to get started because we have a jam-packed hour for you. And so on behalf of the BCCSA, we would like to welcome you to our first 2021 webinar series, Isocyanates, the Silent Sensitizers. This webinar will combine sort of the technical and scientific knowledge required to safely work with isocyanates. We have a couple of great guest speakers for you today. They will discuss the health effects of isocyanates, the WorkSafeBC requirements, and how to make sure that workers are effectively protected from exposure. There will also be a case study of isocyanates control that Jeremy's going to walk us through in a Parkade to demonstrate some common mistakes made when dealing with isocyanates and how to fix them. And so that's what we have in store for you today. And we would love to know a little bit about our audience. So not only where you're from, but we have a polling question that we're going to put up, and we would love you to participate in it. And let us know, have you used a product containing isocyanates before? So let us know yes or no, or maybe you have and you have no idea, you're unaware if you have, and that's why you're here, because you're not too sure. Well, thank you for those of you who participated. Just slightly over half of our participants have used isocyanates before, about 17% have not, and about 30% are, I have no idea. That is why I am here. So without further ado, because we have lots of information to tell you, I want to introduce our panelists to you. So some of you may recognize both of these people as they are very much influencers in our industry. You may recognize Dr. Melanie Gorman-Ning from our RSA Lives that we did. She was our COVID specialist that we had. And Dr. Melanie Gorman-Ning is the Senior Research Scientist at the BC Construction Safety Alliance and an adjunct professor in the UBC School of Population and Public Health. She's an occupation hygiene researcher with a focus on health hazards in the construction industry. She developed the silica exposure database and model that drives the silica control tool that we have. Good morning, Melanie.
Hi, everybody.
The second person that we have for you, again, may not be a stranger to you, is Jeremy Laird. Jeremy Laird is a safety supervisor at Leadcore Construction and holds the CRSP designation. He's a safety professional with 15 years of both site and office-based construction safety experience. As a Leadcore project safety coordinator, he was the safety lead on the 6-tower River Green Parcel 2 project, the Sears Nordstrom redevelopment project, and multiple projects at the Vancouver International Airport. As a safety supervisor, he is currently assisting in the management of the safety and is coordinators on 12 construction projects throughout the Lower Mainland. Thank you, Jeremy. Good morning. Nice to have you.
Good morning, everyone.
So let's get started, shall we? Melanie, we have a pile of people here that have registered and come to this isocyanates webinar, and I'm thinking that there may be some people online, like myself, even a few weeks ago, and said, what in the world are isocyanates? And so I'm wondering if you can just kind of start there with us and tell us, what they are, and I'm just going to hand it over to you, Melanie.
Okay, sure. I just have some slides that I'm going to share right now, so you guys watch out for those. Okay, can you see my slides now, Tanya?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, just to jump right in. So isocyanates, they're chemical products that are used to create synthetic rubbers, foams, coatings. They're used to create like a lot of different stuff like styrofoam or polyurethanes. So they're kind of they're technology that was developed like in the last 100 years, so they're not naturally occurring. Because they are used to make these kind of plastic products, and because they're so useful, they're very, very reactive. That makes them useful, but it also can make them hazardous. So they're identified by this isocyanate group, which is it's a chemical group, this NCO that you see on this slide here, those are the chemicals that are in the group, and that's how they're identified. So if you're looking at a safety data sheet, you will be able to recognize them because they all have isocyanate in the name. So here's a list of a few of them. The most common that you would see are toluene diisocyanate, or TDI, or methylene bisphenyl isocyanate, MDI. Those are the most common ones that are used. But there are others, and as you see, they also have this isocyanate group in the name. This is not like the complete list of all of them. These are just some of the more common ones. And they are all very reactive, and they all have health hazards associated with them. So I'm going to go to my next slide now. So where would we find them on a work site? In construction, they are most commonly used in Parkade membranes. We're going to be talking a bit more about Parkade membranes in our example. In polyurethane spray foams that are applied in, in homes and attics. These are the two most common applications of isocyanates on construction work sites, but there also are some other places where you might find them. They can be present in caulkings, adhesives, or patching materials. Some paints contain isocyanates, although those are not so common in construction. They're more in automotive and manufacturing uses. One thing that I do want to say is that there are commercial grade isocyanate containing products, and there are also consumer grade products. So like something that you buy, if you buy a spray foam at Home Depot, for example, it might contain isocyanate. So just because you're using a consumer grade product doesn't mean that you're totally safe from isocyanates. So that's something to look out for on the ingredient, not the ingredients, but the labels and the safety data sheet.
That's awesome.
Sorry.
All right, Melanie, that's awesome. We actually have a polling question based on that slide that we're going to ask our attendees. Which of the following products have you used, commercial or consumer products? And then go ahead and select all that apply for you. We would love to know what some of the isocyanate products that you currently use, whether it's at work or even maybe at home. Looks like that's it. So it looks like caulking and adhesives are first, and then spray foams, and then Parkade membranes. Jeremy, that's going to be your thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But you can see, everybody can see the results there. The one in orange is the one that looks like that most people use. So that's awesome. Thank you for letting us know what products that you currently use. So Melanie, over to you.
Sure, thank you, Tanya, and thanks for all the information, everyone. That's super useful. So these isocyanates, they are controlled products that have very specific hygiene requirements in the WorkSafeBC Occupational Health and Safety Regulation, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, and that is why we're talking about them today. They can impact your health even if you cannot smell them, and that's why I call them the silent sensitizers, because you could be impacting your health with isocyanates even if you don't realize it, because even if some of them are odorless, like this MDI has no odor, and some of them, they're toxic below the odor threshold, and the odor threshold that's the level in the air at which your nose can detect it. So some of them, they are impacting your health even though your nose cannot detect it, and that's why that's one of the reasons why we have to be very careful with these products.
Awesome, thank you. And we're going to show you guys all a little bit of a video to kind of tell you a little bit more about isocyanates. And this video is a WorkSafe video, if I remember correctly. Is that right, Mel?
Yes, that's right.
Perfect.
The application of insulating foams and finish coatings can present serious hazards for workers. These products contain reactive chemicals called isocyanates. Short-term exposure can cause irritation or burns to the eyes, nose, throat, and skin. Prolonged exposures can cause a much more serious condition known as isocyanate asthma. The vapors released when rolling or spraying can enter a worker's body through unprotected skin, the mouth, and nose. The air passages or tubes that carry air into and out of the lungs are affected. During an asthma attack, these tubes narrow, become inflamed, and may be blocked by mucus, restricting the amount of air that flows in and out of the lungs. Workers that become sensitized or allergic to isocyanates can have an asthma attack even if the airborne concentration is very small. This sensitization is permanent, and in rare cases, these attacks can be fatal. To prevent exposure to isocyanates, you must be properly protected. Workers rolling isocyanate-based coatings should wear appropriate chemically resistant gloves and at least a half-face cartridge respirator. In all cases, the work area must be well ventilated. For more information, contact WorkSafeBC.com.
Put that link, the URL link into the chat for you, so you can certainly watch that at any other time. So Melanie, just because the video is a little bit crackly, and I know that you do have some slides coming up, but can you talk a little bit more about what these health effects are if I am exposed to isocyanates?
Sure. So yeah, isocyanates, they have both what we call acute and chronic health effects. So acute health effects are things that can affect you kind of straight away. So you work with the product one day and you can get the health effect that same day. And these are kind of irritant health effects where it can irritate your eyes, skin, or respiratory system. Like you might get a cough one thing to note about these acute health effects, and actually also the chronic health effects, you might not notice it until after your work shift. So you might be working all day, feel fine, then you go home and your eyes are feeling irritated or you're coughing, and that could still be the effect of the isocyanate. And the chronic or like long-term health effects that can happen after working with isocyanates for months or years is what we would call sensitization. So they are respiratory sensitizers, which means that they cause your respiratory system to become sensitized to the product, so you become more sensitive to exposure. So whereas before you might have been able to tolerate some exposure and feel fine, now that you've developed this immune sensitivity, you really can't be exposed to any isocyanates at all without having some kind of symptoms. And the kind of most severe possible effect of this respiratory sensitization is occupational asthma, and this was shown in the video for those of you who could see it, where in the lungs they tighten, so it's more difficult for air to get through, and you can have an asthma attack. And in some cases, reported in the scientific literature, there have been cases of people who have died from these asthma attacks that they get from isocyanate sensitization. So once people become sensitized to isocyanates, they can't work with them or around them at all, because they are at such a high risk of having these effects. And as I said, the health effects might occur after work. Another thing is our primary concern for the isocyanates is the respiratory sensitization. But for some of them, the exposure can occur through the skin, and the skin exposure could lead to sensitization as well. So that's why you need to protect both your lungs and your skin from isocyanates.
Awesome, perfect. And so now we have some questions about, some people had some questions about regulatory requirements. Before we do that, Melanie, I do have a question in chat that
Sure.
the Q&A, that's come up from Sam, saying that he understands that isocyanates will only affect about 1 in 5 people. The other 4 can have regular exposure with no effects, but that 1 in 5 will develop the symptoms. I'm guessing he's answering, is that a true statement, or do you know any of those kinds of statistics?
I don't know the exact statistics of how many people are vulnerable to this isocyanate sensitization. And this is kind of the issue with any kind of occupational hygiene or health hazard in the workplace is the majority of people will probably be fine, but there is always some percentage of people who will develop the disease, and you don't know who you are. You don't know what group you fall into. And so that's why we need to protect everybody.
Nice. Awesome. Perfect. We do have one more question, chat, but we're going to ask it for Jeremy later when he talks about the Parkade membranes. So, so tell us a little bit about the regulatory requirements.
Sure. Yeah, so because isocyanates are sensitizers, there are specific regulatory requirements that apply for sensitizers. They are designated substances in the Occupational Health and Safety Regulation, and there are a few things that entails. One is that they are what's called ALARA substances. They need to be, so that means that the exposure levels need to be kept as low as reasonably achievable. So you need to demonstrate that you're doing like everything that you can do to limit exposure to these substances. You definitely need to eliminate or minimize exposure for sensitized workers. So anybody who is sensitized, they need to maybe be reassigned to a different work area. And you need to have a written exposure control plan about how you're going to manage isocyanates in the workplace. Now, one thing that I actually do want to mention here before we go on is that isocyanates are not the only respiratory sensitizers that you might encounter in a construction site. Probably the major one would be epoxies. And so this is something to look out for if you are going to be substituting an isocyanate containing product for another product. Is they might contain epoxies, which are also sensitizers. So that's just something to look out for, because they would have the same regulatory requirement. There are occupational exposure limits for isocyanates, as there are with many occupational health hazards. And these occupational exposure limits, they are restrictions on the amount and the duration of exposure that a worker can have in a work shift. So in an 8-hour shift, a worker can only be exposed to 0.005 parts per million in the air. So that means for every air molecule, there can only be 0.005 parts of isocyanate. And we're going to have a video that comes after this, which kind of helps you to visualize what parts per million means. But this is a very, very, very low amount. So that you have to keep it very low. And the ceiling, which is the maximum amount of isocyanates that you can have at any time, is 0.01 parts per million. So just for a comparison, the 8-hour exposure limit for gasoline is 300 parts per million. And so for isocyanates, because they're so toxic, we keep it much lower. So the next slide is a video. I don't know if you want to play that on your computer, Tanya. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing.
What does it mean to be 1 in a million? Not in the greeting card sense. In the scientific sense, where 1 part per million is a unit of measurement. Parts per million counts the number of units of one substance per 1 million units of another. It can measure concentrations when a small amount makes a big difference. For example, a concentration of just 35 ppm of carbon monoxide in the air is poisonous to us. We encounter measurements like this pretty often, but because it's hard to conceptualize really large numbers, it's difficult to wrap our brain around what 1 part per million really means. So here are 9 helpful ways to visualize it. If you had 11,363 pianos worth of piano keys, one of those keys would be about 1 part per million. So would a single granule of sugar among 273 sugar cubes. 1 second in 11.5 days. Or 4 dots in the painting A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Jatte. Your bathtub's capacity is about 60 gallons, so 7 drops of ink would be 1 part per million. The English version of the Harry Potter series has 1,084,170 words, which makes hippogriff on page 221 of The Prisoner of Azkaban a little less than 1 part per million. A million kernels of corn is about 1,250 ears, so 1 kernel in that truckload would be 1 part per million. There are 10 million bricks in the Empire State Building, so 1 part per million would be a pile of just 10. And finally, 100 people worked together to animate this video. Collectively, they have about 10 million hairs on their heads. Pluck 10 of those hairs, and you have 1 in a million.
Awesome. Hey, we like it when it works. That's awesome. I do have a question, a couple questions in the Q&A. One I'm going to bring up now. And Mel, I don't know if Dr. Melanie will be able to answer this question or not, if she's familiar with it, but why are isocyanates for polyurethane SDS in the UK and other countries as possibly cancer causing? Why are the same products SDS listed as unknown in North America?
Yeah, well, there is at least one isocyanate that is listed as a carcinogen. The toluene diisocyanate is listed as a carcinogen. I think that's in the WorkSafeBC regulation. I'm not sure about the other ones if they are listed as carcinogens in the UK, but I know for sure definitely that the TDI is, and so that's a good point. Thank you.
Awesome. Perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, we, again, the next question in the Q&A, I'm going to come to that when Jeremy talks about the Parkade, but we're just going to come back to Melanie. She's going to put up her slides again and continue talking to us a little bit more about these isocyanates.
Okay, sure. All right. Okay, can you see my slide again? This is the one about
Yeah.
Parkade membranes? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, so yeah, so I'm just gonna, the things we're gonna talk about the most, because these are the ones that we're gonna talk about how to control them, are with the Parkade membranes and the polyurethane foam. So just to kind of briefly go over what these are for anyone who's unfamiliar. Parkade membranes, they are a mixture of chemical products, including isocyanates, that are used to waterproof concrete slabs in parkades to prevent water damage and to protect the concrete from a whole host of things that they could be exposed to, including water, salts, chemicals, gasoline, etc. And we're going to have a whole example all about Parkade membranes, so you'll see a lot more about that. The next slide is polyurethane spray foams. Now these are this is probably where you might see some of the highest exposure levels to isocyanates with the polyurethane spray foam, and that is because it is being sprayed directly into the air. When you're rolling it, or like with the Parkade membrane applications, your exposure would just come from the isocyanates vaporizing from the liquid. But with this one, you're actually spraying it into the air. So you can have very high levels of exposure. And with these polyurethane foams, the isocyanates and a copolymer react to form a rigid foam and isolation. Once it's all reacted, there should be no more exposure, but there can be a while of off-gassing before that happens. There's also like a high potential. There is also a high potential for skin exposure in these spray foam applications because there's so much of it in the air, and that's why you see this person here. They're all kitted up with their Tyvek suit. So for the Parkade membranes, there are a number of controls that we can use to reduce exposure. We have to always, as always with occupational health hazards, we use the hierarchy of controls where you start with elimination and substitution, and then consider engineering controls, administrative, and finally PPE. So you may be able to substitute a product. Maybe you could substitute it with something that doesn't contain isocyanates. But again, you have to be careful that you're not introducing another possible health hazard when you do that. Or if you do have to use isocyanates, you could try and select a product with a lower percentage of isocyanates in it, or with a lower vapor pressure. So vapor pressure, that describes how likely something is to evaporate into the air. So if you're able to see on the safety data sheet that the isocyanate that you're working with has a lower vapor pressure, then that would be less likely to evaporate and would cause a lower exposure level. You need to use ventilation. You need to make sure the area is well ventilated. The fans need to be intrinsically safe so that you don't have explosions or fires. And we're going to talk a little bit more about ventilation in this presentation, but just to introduce the idea. And one of the very important things that you need to do with ventilation is make sure you're venting to a safe outdoor area. It's no good if you have a ventilation system that is venting like directly above where everybody eats lunch or something, because then you're exposing a whole bunch of people. So that is something to be aware of when you're creating your ventilation system. And you need to isolate unprotected workers. So one of the principles we're going to be talking about today is making sure that people who don't need to be near the isocyanate products are not near the isocyanate products. So minimizing the number of people who are involved in this kind of work. You can create a containment, which we will talk about, or barriers, and you can try and keep people as far away from these as you can. If you're outdoors, try and keep people about 8 meters away from the place where you're working with isocyanates. If you're indoors, 8 meters. If you're outdoors, 3 meters, because it can, outdoors there's more airflow usually. If you're working in a Parkade membrane, you need to use, the people who are working directly with isocyanates need to use a half mask respirator with organic vapor or acid gas and particulate cartridges. So it needs to be able to filter out the organic vapor. And these cartridges, they're not like the P100 cartridges where you can use them again and again. These ones need to be changed every shift to make sure that they are working effectively.
Nice. So looking at this slide here for the hierarchy of controls, we actually have a polling question that we're going to ask our audience today. What have you done to protect your workers from working with isocyanates? And again, it's a multiple choice, so you can answer many different answers, or many of them if you wish to do that. While people are doing the polling, Melanie, I'm going to come to you with a Q&A question. When we talk about the hierarchy, we talk about substitutes, and Gerline has asked, what are some good substitutes?
I actually don't know off the top of my head about the individual products. I think you need to look at the product and see, and look at the labels, look at the safety data sheet. I don't know any individual products that I can recommend. I'm sorry.
No worries. We didn't come prepared for use this sales product. Looks like a lot of people have used PPE, of course, so respirator, ventilation, protective clothing, barriers seem to be some of the popular ones that are coming up here. So we're just going to go ahead and end that poll now, and we're going to show you the results. So there you are, Dr. Melanie. Respirators, people have gone to PPE, or the most common at this time for our guests. Ventilation looks like the second, and then a tie between protective clothing and barriers and signage. That's up there. Awesome. Thank you guys for participating in our poll. There is another question that has come into the Q&A from James. It says, are these released from Parkade membranes when disturbed for a reno, where heat may be applied, cutting away old steel guardrails and welding replacements?
Yeah, that is possible. If you are doing some kind of hot cutting of a material that does contain isocyanates, then yes, you could be causing exposure under those circumstances.
And then another question from Nadine. Hello, Nadine. Great to have you here. For the organic vapor respirator cartridges, is 8 hours of use a good standard if the cartridge is blocked and taped in between use? So basically, if they have the cartridges, they take them off, but they're blocked, so they're not taking up any other stuff coming into them.
So if you're using it on multiple days, but you're blocking and taping it, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, there are kind of calculations that you can do to figure out how long you can use an organic vapor cartridge. But I think just for ease, it's best to just change it every day, just so you're sure. Because the problem with the organic vapor ones is if it's not working, you don't know that it's not working.
Perfect. And if spray foam has set up, can you cut it or trim it without a respirator?
I would not recommend doing that, but I'm not certain, but I would not personally.
Okay, perfect. And then we're gonna, because I know there's still another couple slides here for information, but one more question. Is half-mass respirator adequate for spray foam? I always suggest using air supply.
Yeah, I think air supply is recommended for spray foam because the exposure levels can get so high.
Perfect. Awesome. And I know there's a couple more questions. We'll come to those shortly. Dr. Melanie's got a couple more slides here that she's going to show about the polyurethane foam spray. So we've talked about the membranes. So now we're going to talk about that polyurethane foam spray.
Yes. So here we have just the kind of a list of controls that will be used for spray foams. And as you see, because the levels are higher, it says here, an SCBA or supplied air respirator is required when working with the spray foam. So you need like you like with the Parkade membranes or any use of isocyanates, you still want to look at substitution. You need ventilation. You need barriers, exclusion, maybe create a containment. But you do need to up your PPE. You need a more powerful respirator. The people need to be wearing a Tyvek suit, goggles that seal, and gloves. And you need to make sure that you're using the right type of gloves. Nitrile or polyvinyl alcohol are preferred. Not every glove material protects against all chemicals, so that's why it's important to pay attention to the type of gloves that you're using. So here I'm just going to talk a bit about containment. Containment is something that we use when we're setting up a ventilation system to create negative pressure within the containment area. And what that does is it means that the air pressure inside the containment is lower than the air pressure outside of the containment, so that there is no incentive for the air to escape from the containment. So this contains the isocyanates within the work area, protects workers outside. It also makes it easier just to ventilate the area, since it's a smaller area that you need to ventilate. You can create it with polyurethane sheeting, sealing all the gaps, and then having signage around the area. And I got a picture here just of a containment setup where you see there's a supply fan bringing air into the containment, and there's also a fan blowing air out of the containment, and it creates airflow across the place where the worker is working, and it keeps all of the isocyanates within this area. Now these can be used. These can be used for any kind of application. And I have this document which we're going to send out a bulletin with links in it, and I'm going to link to this document called Ventilation Considerations for Spray Polyurethane Foam, and it has some good information about how to set up a containment, and some of the same principles can be applied for other applications, not just for spray foams.
And while you're going to your next slide, we do have a spray foam question. Wondering if spray fire stop is also made from isocyanates. Do you know what that is? Fire stop?
I don't know what that specific.
Jeremy, do you know what fire stop is?
Yeah, some of those may very well be isocyanate containing, but you would definitely have to reference the SDS sheet.
Okay, perfect, awesome. All right, back to you, Melanie.
Okay, so it kind of leads into what Jeremy's going to be talking about. When you do set up a containment, you need to have a plan of how it's going to work. You can't just use the same plan for every work site. You need to make your plan specific to the work site that you're going to be working at. You need to consider, where are you going to be drawing fresh air from? Where are you going to exhaust to? What fans are you going to use? Are they sufficient for this area? What's your exclusion zone? Because every workspace is going to be different. So there are going to be different challenges and considerations. And because of that, you need to always verify your system to make sure that it's working. And there are a few different ways that you can do that. You can use smoke tests. You can create smoke and watch where it blows to see if it's going in the direction that you expect. You can look at the sheet billowing, and Jeremy's going to have an example to show what the sheet should look like if it's working correctly. You can test. You can test your fans to make sure that they're powerful enough. There are differential pressure monitors that you can get that measure the air pressure both inside and outside of a containment. That's another way to check, and make sure that the really important thing is to make sure that you are maintaining that negative pressure within the containment. And you are going to need to do ongoing maintenance and verification of your whole system to make sure that the ducts are all working correctly, the fans are working correctly, there are no gaps that have been introduced. So as the project goes on, you need to continue to verify it. So I think.
And I know you want to talk a little bit about emergencies and exposure control plan, but for time, we do need to get to that case study. So
Yes.
let's do a quick thing on the emergencies, and
Yeah,
then
and then we can move on for sure. Okay, so just very quickly, emergencies. You do need to. Emergencies can occur with isocyanates. You need to be prepared for spills, reactions, and fires because they are so reactive. They can cause these chemical reactions. And first aid considerations. You need to have an eye spray system if you're working with isocyanates. Now, there's a WorkSafeBC bulletin called Isocyanates in Industry, which has all the information about this. So I would encourage you to check that out. I'm going to skip this slide because we already talked about exposure control plans. And yes, now I can turn it over to Jeremy.
awesome, perfect. Thank you very much, Melanie. Appreciate that. And there is a question. I'm not too sure if Melanie or Jeremy can ask this. It's from Sam. What is available of testing of exposure levels of Parkade? They've been looking for some over the last several months. Even the manufacturer hasn't been able to provide testing results to develop a proper exposure control plan. Melanie or Jeremy, do either of you have a suggestion about testing of exposure levels in Parkades? Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, in our case study, we're going to discuss that Ledcor, we actually brought in a third-party consultant.
Perfect. Well, then let's just turn the case study over to you, Jeremy, and go for it.
Okay. So recently, down at one of our projects, it's a relatively large Parkade, it's about 400,000 square feet. We had a contractor that was coming in to apply Parkade membrane, like in the photo there. That contractor did come to us with an exposure control plan. They did have a plan for ventilation. They even had some third-party testing results from a previous Parkade that they'd worked in. And they wanted to use those sort of tested out controls from that Parkade in our Parkade. So on the next slide here, you will see this is the plan. So in the yellow, this is the layout, basically the square footage that they wanted to paint or apply the Parkade membrane in. The first control that they had in place was just a delineation of sort of a buffer zone of 25 feet around the application zone to keep any additional workers in the area away from the application area by 25 feet. They did have some exhaust fans set up, totaling about almost 16,000 CFM, discharging into a shaft location. They even went up top. They verified where they were exhausting to so they could make sure that workers were away from that area and whatnot as well. They did have 3 intake fans in and around the control zone. They had booster fans strategically placed in through the space to move the contaminants within that space to get them and maneuver it to the exhaust fan locations. The contractor then did a calculation, a ballpark of the square or the cubic feet of the space that they would be applying to. And they figured with the fans at the exhaust location, they would get a complete air exchange every 25 minutes or so. So an issue that we had was one of the contractors that we had on site had in past had an issue with isocyanate exposure at a site back east somewhere. And they were very concerned about the fact that it was sort of an open control zone rather than a containment. So they wanted us as the prime contractor to verify that they, of course, were going to be safe. So we asked the contractor then to verify their controls with smoke testing. So that's the next slide here. So had the contractor, they set up all the controls in the places where they wanted to have the fans. Control zone was set up. We even invited WorkSafe down to watch the testing process. The smoke testing was completed and it never really propagated towards the exhaust fans at all. The smoke actually ended up moving deeper into the Parkade and Really, this is due to the fact that the Parkade being 10 times the size of the zone, the calculations for the exhausting the cubic meters wasn't really that accurate, being wide open and not contained. So the smoke didn't do what we wanted it to do. So what went wrong? So the exposure control plan that we were handed, it didn't evaluate the site-specific conditions. So having it be such a large Parkade, it wasn't taken into consideration. They were basing it off of a plan from a previous Parkade that had been tested out professionally, but was a much smaller Parkade, very more contained. It was a far different situation. It didn't prevent exposure to adjacent contractors or any of the applicators because there wasn't a containment. The fact that they chose delineators and barrier tape versus a poly wall, you know, I can understand it as a prime contractor, you know, a contractor wanting to keep costs down a little bit. But we've found even, you know, doing this work late at night because of the off-gassing time, by the time workers come in the next day, it's really, it's not as safe as people would think. So having these poly containments very much keeps the contaminants inside of the enclosed zone. The insufficient or ineffective ventilation, and poor positioning, there really just wasn't enough exhaust fans going CFM-wise. It was about half of what we actually required once the poly containment was up. And the size and the configuration of the Parkade, we looked at that, and you know, all the stair cores and the elevator cores, and you know, you've got cinder block walls that are obstructing, you know, air passage and stuff. You really have to evaluate that space on a case-by-case basis. You can't use something from a past Parkade. So the changes that we made, obviously we installed this a full poly enclosure. We actually ended up making the space a little bit bigger, and we were able to fully poly it off. You can see in the photo there's some zip pulls there. We've weighted it down with 2x4 and then taped up in and around. It was quite effective, actually. It's not heavy material, it's just 3 mil poly, so you do have to make sure you're taking care of it, but it sealed off the area. We ended up dividing the Parkade into 10 separate 40,000 square foot enclosures and had a phased containment plan developed ahead of time, so we could sort of identify where's best to put the containments and have the exhaust and intake where it needed to be. The control measures were to be proven effective, so we were going to go back and actually have the smoke testing done again, adjust where the booster fans were. One of the big ones was these sort of dead zones in behind stair cores and these walls, making sure that the fans were placed in a location where it would clear the contaminants out of those areas. And we actually contracted, Ledcor ourselves, we contracted the OHS consulting to come down and provide an evaluation and testing to truly verify that the containment is doing what we're expecting it to do. So what does the effective ventilation look like? So you can see on the left, we've changed in item 1 there, a full containment all the way around. So we've tied it together with, you know, just cinder block and concrete walls and the poly, adjusted how we're going to set it up. And you can see at the bottom left there that it's actually a little bit bigger. It encompasses more of the area. 2, we've more than doubled the CFMs for the exhaust fans to allow for adequate air exchanges once the space was calculated and that was factored in. 3 and 4, the booster fans and the intake fans, really they are the same size of fans. We did have to adjust the location, so you can see the bottom intake fan, there's an arrow there. It was adjusted over to the far left so that it would come around the back side of that core. The booster fans, they had to be moved around. There was a lot of juggling once the smoke testing for the effective ventilation plan was put in place to verify that there wasn't any dead spots, and we were moving them around. well, there's only 2 arrows, but I think there ended up being in this 40,000 square feet, there was about 9 booster fans from behind different cores and everything to get the smoke moving like we needed it to. So end of the day in item 5, for the ineffective ventilation plan, it really was hard to calculate the cubic feet because it was wide open to the remaining portions of the Parkade. So now in the effective plan, we do have an actual value of 361,160 cubic feet. And with the fans that we had in there, we were able to achieve 5.35 air exchanges per hour, which was more than adequate for what we were doing. So during the evaluation, we need to make sure, and Melanie alluded to this earlier about monitoring the negative pressure of the enclosure. Poly enclosure should be billowing inwards, and you can see in the photo on the right, you can see that sort of inward curve of the poly wall there. That is important. You can scientifically test it as well. They do rent and sell portable differential pressure monitors. Some are even fancy enough to text you when your negative pressure varies from a preset quantity. So, you know, you don't have to have that, but, you know, it would verify for sure that you have that proper negative pressure. We did end up having to sort of add fans to the exhaust points and turn off some of the intake fans. We found that we actually had too many intake fans, so we had to shut a few down, adjust their locations to make sure that we were getting that flow, and we did have that effective negative pressure. And then we also had some very small openings throughout the space, vent shafts, small duct openings and stuff that we needed to make. So, and this is where VOHS came into play. They came down and they did their testing, and they actually found that outside of the containment where these other contractors were concerned about their safety, there was actually no detectable levels of isocyanate in those areas outside of the poly containment. So perfectly safe to be wandering around. Inside of the containment, we were well below the exposure limit for a 4-hour period. So, and you can see below the MDI exposure limit is 5 parts per billion. And the test results showed that we were actually 0.019 parts per billion within the containment. So well below the exposure limit, and far easier for the PPE to keep up on, that's for sure. Other lessons learned. So I know there was some questions about potentially about VOCs. At the beginning of this, we made the decision as a team to attempt to get a lower VOC product passed. There is some concerns at times that they don't have the same performance as the higher VOC products. The engineer and the consultants for the project managed to find a product that would do a similar job and meet the requirements of the customer. So we were able to then change to that lower VOC product. Honestly, it stinks far less. Still has a distinctive odor, but it stinks far less. You could smell it, obviously, and the VOCs were detected. In this case, the VOCs were proprietary to the manufacturer of the product, so they were not listed in the SDS what they actually were. So at that point, we ran under the assumption that they were not a controlled product. So while there was VOCs in the area, it was not harmful to the people that would have been breathing them in. Where we started having issues, and where a lot of contractors start having issues, I know they often use xylene to clean tools. The contractor on this job was just throwing out the tools at the end of the workday. They would just bag them up and get rid of them and dispose of them. But a lot of the time when they're using xylene to clean the tools, and in some cases actually thin the product, especially when it's cold out, you then now take this low VOC product and you've introduced a whole bunch of VOCs into it, and you really change the dynamics of that, the inside of that containment. Another big takeaway was the off-gassing rates. So The manufacturer in this case of this product claimed that it was fully sealed and safe within 2 to 3 hours. The testing from VOHS was pretty clear that we didn't actually achieve respirable clean air, which is defined as 10% of peak VOC's limit, till 20 hours after the application. So currently, we are pushing our projects to have those containments stay up for at least 24 hours and use multiple containments so that they can then have them jumping throughout the parkade, almost leapfrogging containments along and keeping that thing sealed off to other workers and even themselves until after the off-gassing is complete.
And Jeremy, there is a couple people actually asking questions about that as far as, ventilation's been set up. What would be the minimum length of time before re-entry to the workplace without using PPE? Is there somewhere we would find that time, or how would we know that, okay, now it's safe for us to go in without PPE?
Well, and that's the thing, that with this one, if we had just gone and not done the testing and followed the data sheets, because normally in the past I would have just said follow the technical data sheets. In this case, it was 2 to 3 hours, and the actual off-gassing was 20, at least 20. So that's a hard one to really nail down. I think what you'd end up having to do is you can go from the technical data sheets, but if you're really looking to have verified information about that, get a third-party consultant. Typically the results from the manufacturer in sort of a perfect environment. Us out on site, you're looking at, it's cold, or it's a little bit moisture in the air, or, with the fans going, you get a different kind of cross breeze and stuff. So it's not a set sort of in a lab environment. So that one's a tough one to answer, but if you get a third-party consultant down to your project, they will be able to give you those results.
Perfect. That's awesome. Excellent. So we got about just 5 minutes left. I know Jeremy's just going to do a quick conclusion of everything he's talked about. And I just quick question that I have, Jeremy, is this case study that you've done, is this in the Lower Mainland, or was it somewhere else, or just out of curiosity?
No, it was in town here in the Lower Mainland. It was at a job out in Surrey.
Nice. Awesome.
So yeah, in conclusion, sort of the big takeaways for us as a prime contractor, making sure that we have enclosures and effective ventilation. In this case, it was 5.35 air exchanges, and you can see that the parts per billion with this product was 0.019, which is well below the exposure limit. So we are currently pushing on our sites an air exchange of about 5. If you can maintain 5, that would be perfect, sort of the gold standard for ventilation right now. Verification of the enclosure in the ventilation system. Pretty important to make sure that you're going around prior to startup, making sure the fans are all plugged in, making sure that you do have that negative pressure, and nothing's changed in the time that you've gone for coffee break, and you come back. Make sure that you're verifying that stuff. The manufacturer's information for the off-gassing rate may very well be unreliable. So the prudent thing to do would be have a consultant come down and do that testing, especially on a much larger project, 400,000 square feet. They're going to be there for a few months doing that work, right? So I do recommend having some form of a pre-start checklist to verify that correct controls are in place. So as a prime contractor, just putting something together on the fly during that initial assessment so that you can then go back out and verify the next containment and the containment after that. And you can also take a look at the stuff throughout the day. You come in the next day to put on a second coat, make sure that the lighting is still there. Someone hasn't come and unplugged your cord because they needed to run a drill in the corner or something along those lines. Ensuring adequate power for ventilation and lighting. It's a big one from a coordination standpoint for doing this work by a prime contractor. Want to make sure that there is enough lighting in the parkade to do it safely, and that there is enough power down there that you're not having to have people steal each other's cords. And then complex or unusual situations may require that hygienist If it's a little bit different, huge parkade, walls dividing the space, limited ventilation points or intake points. I mean, we have a parkade downtown right now that's 9 stories deep. So ventilating the bottom 2 floors, it's going to be quite difficult getting the contaminants up and out of that space. So those are the big things I would be looking at.
Nice. Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you, Melanie, for being here today and giving us tons of information on isocyanates and where we would find them, or what the health effects are, what the controls are in place, the case study. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that, to see what it really looks like in real life when we're putting that together, and some of the bumps, hey, that you run into, just to try to make it work. What I found interesting is that you guys increased the area on the one case study. You increased the area for ventilation. I just thought that was totally brilliant. Was that your idea? Brilliance?
No, no. It was sort of a team effort. To be honest, it just sort of eliminated that corner and it improved airflow as well.
Nice. Awesome. Well, we are coming up to the hour, which is when we said that we would be done in 1 minute. And so the panelists are going to stay online for a couple minutes to answer a couple more questions in Q&A. If you'd like to stay, you can. There's a couple of the answers will just be typed in there for you. But I do want to tell all of you that this recording will be posted along with a copy of the slides and the information bulletin on the BCCSA website. You also want to consider following the BCCSA on social media to stay up to date on the next webinar series and when today's video will be posted. All of you who've registered that are online right now, you will also be receiving an email directly to you with a link to this video, as well as a survey. We would love to hear your thoughts on the webinar as we go into 2021, offering more like this for you. I would like to take this moment and thank our panelists, Dr. Melanie Gorman-Ning and Jeremy Laird. Thank you so much, guys. They just really have done this because they want to give back to industry. So thank you so much. And so for the rest of you listening and that are here with us, on behalf of the panelists, myself, and the BCCSA, be safe and stay healthy. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming. And then Matthew's asking, once spray foam has set up and off-gassing has subsided, can you touch the spray foam and trim it with utility knife without PPE? Melanie, that's for you. So it's set up, and off-gassing has subsided. Can you touch the spray foam and trim it without PPE?
Yeah, once it's set, you can definitely touch it. As for trimming it, I'm not sure if you would want to trim it without PPE because you could be creating dust. You know, it's probably not as bad as before it's set, but I think if I was going to be generating dust, I think I would probably want to wear PPE. But maybe not the complete, like maybe not like as much PPE as you had been wearing before, but definitely you at least want to have respiratory protection.
Okay, perfect. And then there was a few questions from Raymond, if he's still on. What are the common solvents added for viscosity? Does anybody know what that question's meaning? I'm not too sure. Melanie?
Yes.
Oh, Jeremy?
So yeah, no, it sort of leads back to the adding xylene. So quite often what happens when it's cold, you know, you get temperatures like there are out right now. A lot of these contractors, they put xylene in to thin the product a little bit. It allows them to spread it more easily. But like we talked about, it increases the VOCs, and it can in turn cause problems that way, increasing those VOCs.
Perfect. And then Melanie, I think this question will be you. I think they're asking, it's a prime contractor that's asking this, are health effects more reported amongst trades or odor concerns more commonly reported? I don't know if you would know that. It's a
I don't know the answer to that, but I would say one concern about the health effects for this is that people might be having health effects and not reporting them because they might not be connecting it to their work. So, so yeah, you do always have to be careful with these kind of reports. But I don't know about the kind of the proportion.
And Jeremy, then, have you had anybody that has been sensitized, like workers that got sensitized because of this? Do you have any experience in that or heard of that yet?
Yes. No, I've heard from people from around town that yes, it's happened, and it's happened on sites from Leadcore in the past as well.
And okay, so there's a word, and I have to apologize to both of you. Methacrylates.
Yeah, methacrylates.
Okay. Do polyurethane quick cure membranes have highly volatile solvents, and are they compared to methacrylates?
Are they compared to methacrylates? I am not sure. I know that methacrylate exposure is something that you might need to look out for, and the solvent, I think it would depend on the individual product that you're working with.
And then how would somebody do that? Just look at the SDS sheet kind of thing and do some research on it? Okay. Yeah, perfect. So I think that we've answered all the questions for people who are still, a few people still stayed on. So we've answered all the questions. Oh, no, a couple more here. Any information, I have a quick question. Can we get, don't know the answer to that. Is there a list, quick reference sheet of compounds that are isocyanates that is easy to review on site for safety officers, supervisors? So the bulletin, tell us a little bit about the bulletin maybe. Mel, what's going to be in it?
The bulletin, it doesn't have a list of products that might contain isocyanates. It has kind of the same information that was in the presentation, just put into a document for review. But we don't, you know, we haven't gone through and looked at all the products on the market to identify the ones that have isocyanates. And
Jeremy, has Leadcore made a list by any chance of all products with isocyanates in it?
No, we don't have a list of that nature, but I think the easiest way to go about it is if you get your hands on the up-to-date SDS sheet, you take a look. There'll be huge, horrifying scientific names for these things, but you will very clearly be able to determine that it says isocyanate attached to one of those horrific scientific names that no one can seem to pronounce except for Melanie, maybe.
I'm sorry that I can't even, I had a hard time with isocyanates. I had to practice that word for a few days so that I sounded okay today. Those are big words, and we appreciate you, Melanie, for being the amazing person that you are. Thank you so much for providing the science behind that. And Jeremy, one more time, thank you so much for sharing your case study. Leadcore has always been a big part of driving safety in our country, really. And so thank you for taking the time. Really, really appreciate that. And so we do need to let people go. There's still 50 people kind of hanging on. But Jeremy, one thing, what would you say if there was a subcontract or sub-trade right now that's still here online? What's the one thing that you would say, hey, the prime is going to this, don't forget this? What would that be?
Probably verify the controls with science. So whether that be a negative pressure differential monitor or just verifying visually that your containment it has that negative pressure, your smoke testing for dead spaces inside of that, and doing the mathematical calculations of your space and how many CFMs are required for those 5 air exchanges.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. If you need to get a hold of anybody from the BCCSA, please go to the bccsa.ca website. Melanie's information is there for you as well. And Jeremy is on social media, I know, because I stalk him in LinkedIn to see what he is doing. And so I'm sure he'd be more than willing to answer any other questions that you may have. So again, we will be ending the webinar now. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Jeremy. Bye-bye, everybody.